Mr. Lacy, it is a pleasure having you on BNC. So,
thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. A lot to cover. Let's jump right in. How much of this case is truly about race?
Well, look, there are definitely racial undertones and even some overtones that are, I guess, surrounding this case. But really, it's going to come down to is the science, right? Positional and/or restraint asphyxia. The backdrop is definitely going to be influenced by the racial dynamics, not only around the nation, but of course, specifically in Minnesota, when we're talking about the southern part of Minneapolis, where a lot of these incidents have happened, including the George Floyd incident.
And another question for you is, so what's the prosecutor's argument versus what the defense needs to prove?
Well, the prosecutors are going to have to show that these officers knew or acted with some type of deliberation in the killing of George Floyd. And I think that is largely going to be based on the science and the evidence that shows that law enforcement officers are not only trained about this subject matter, but that they very well knew and appreciated the danger and risk to George Floyd when they were pressing on his neck. The defense, on the other hand, wants really to take this out of that scientific world and the medical world and really rely on emotion, unfair critiques that may be presented towards law enforcement, and some more, I guess, language and feelings about Black Lives Matter and whether or not people support that overall agenda. But I think the prosecution's job is to keep this narrowly focused on this incident and specifically the science that relates to positional and restraint asphyxia.
And Mr. Lacy, speaking of the science, what type of evidence are they going to allow in the court? I know there were two separate autopsies, one done by the county and then one done by the George family. So what are they taking into consideration?
Well, look, I'm sure that the sides will want both of those autopsies and the results of them to be allowed into evidence and be presented at least to the jury. What things will they be taking into consideration? Well, whether or not there is some type of reliability of the science. Is this a tried and tested and true measure of the science or the medicine as it relates to positional restraint asphyxia? Is this full of speculation? Those will be some of the gatekeepers, if you will, for the court to determine whether or not these opinions should be allowed in the courtroom. Of course, the county's medical examiner is probably going to have a little bit of a head start in that regard because they work for the state. And there is some presumption there that what they're doing is reliable state work. I don't see how, though, the second autopsy done by the family is going to be excluded in that regard. But I don't think those autopsies really have a significant difference in them, right? The real question is whether or not the jury is going to buy into either inflamed notions about unfair critiques of police or whether or not they're going to adhere to the evidence that suggests that these officers knew, and Chauvin knew especially, and appreciated the risk to George Floyd's life.
Well, we appreciate your insight, Mr. Lacy, and thank you for joining us here on BNC. We look forward to welcoming you back.
Great. Thank you for having me.